Hello everyone, good evening. I hope I am audible, visible to all of you. Please let me know in the chat section if I am visible, audible clearly to all of you. Okay, wonderful. So before we begin with the session, आज का session mainly AILET oriented है because आप सबने आज AILET exam दिया है. So more or less, I want to analyze this test for you. We won't go into too much of details today. We will be keeping a separate session later on where we can discuss all the questions so that you get an idea what could have been a good approach to solve those questions, could be helpful for CLAT. But right now, today was the exam day. I do not want to increase your anxiety by going through all the questions, by telling you where you went wrong, and all of that. Today is not for that. In fact, the next 1 week, we don't have to mull over what went wrong or what went well for us. What we have to keep in mind that we have a goal ahead. एक गोल है जो एक हफ्ते बाद हमको अचीव करना है. आज हमारा पेपर कितना अच्छा गया है, कितना बुरा गया है, इस बेसिस पे हमको अगले एक हफ्ते में अपनी प्रिपरेशन को सेट नहीं करना है. ठीक है. जिनका बहुत अच्छा गया है उनको ये नहीं सोचना है कि चलो एलेट अच्छा चला गया तो क्लैट में हो ना हो, अच्छा जाए ना जाए, हमको नहीं सोचना है. एंड जिनका बुरा गया है या एक्सपेक्टेशंस के हिसाब से नहीं गया है, उनको ये नहीं सोचना है कि हमारा इसमें नहीं हुआ तो क्लैट में तो क्या ही होगा. ठीक है. दिस इज नॉट द टाइम फॉर ऑल दैट. वॉट यू नीड टू फोकस ऑन इज दैट गोल दैट यू हैव इन माइंड. ओके. So before we go into the analysis for today's test, could you tell me in the live chat section how did the paper go for all of you? कैसा था पेपर? What was your review of the entire thing? Could you tell me? Could you give me an idea so that I know कि मुझे किन चीजों पे ज्यादा फोकस करना है? Okay, so it was difficult. Vishwajit found it difficult. What about others? Could you tell me quickly? How did the paper go for all of you? So overall, I think when I spoke to a few students after the exam, one thing that everybody complained about कि सर फॉर्मेट तो एकदम ही अलग था, पैटर्न एकदम अलग हो गया, हम तो एकदम वी वर सरप्राइज्ड बाय इट, राइट. काफी स्टूडेंट्स ने बोला कि सर पेपर वाज टू डिफिकल्ट, इट वाज टू लेंदी. तो वो एक ऑफ कोर्स इशू था. And after analyzing the paper myself, I also figured out that there were certain things which were easy, but majority of the things were moderately difficult. Okay. And we will of course go into it. We will discuss that part. And also how do we tackle such surprises in future. Okay. That also we will go into it. But let's understand first. Take a deep breath today. You have achieved something today. Okay. You have been waiting for this day for too long. You gave a test. How it went, you know it already. Okay. Might have been good for many, might have been extremely difficult for many. Some may not have been able to perform to their potential. Some may not have attempted that many questions. All of these problems you might have figured out on your own. But this is the day that you were waiting for. This has given you a lot of lessons for the future exams which are going to come up, because there is no way you're going to skip on the exams in future, right? You will be writing CLAT, you will be writing LSAT, you will be writing SLAT exam, you will be writing MHCET exam. So we do not have to ruin these future exams just because of what happened today. Okay. So irrespective of how it went today, whether it was good or bad for you, take a breath, take a deep breath, feel that sense of achievement that you've achieved something today. Okay. That something has gone by, we can't change it now, so there is nothing to worry about. Okay. So focus on the things which are coming ahead. Just because one exam did not go as per our expectations does not mean that all the exams are now gone for you. Majority of the exams are still left, so do not worry about this. This one exam is not going to define your future. Please keep that in mind. Okay. Now let's analyze and go into today's AILET test. A general overview which I received from students and when I read the paper myself, this is something that I figured out. One, see, keep in mind, paper being lengthy and time consuming is not the same thing. Okay, a lot of times you have to read a lot of things. Okay, if you look at last year's AILET paper, just giving you a short example, it was 36 pages long. Okay, a lot of content in it was also there, right? So if I have to read more content, I'm going to take a lot of time also in it. It's generally considered lengthy. If you look at today's paper, it was around 32 pages long, but it was time consuming. If you look at the questions themselves, especially in logical reasonings, because some of the paragraphs were relatively easy to comprehend, some of the paragraphs were quite easy to understand also, some of the paragraphs were quite technical, some of them were quite long also, and add to that the fact that when you went into the logical reasoning section, it took a lot of time. You may have read the question quickly, but attempting that question, reaching a conclusion would have taken a lot of time. So today's paper, I would say, was extremely time consuming and lengthy, of course, in some way. Comparatively, if you look at words and papers and other things, it was shorter than last year, around 4 pages short. Okay, but it doesn't matter whether 4 pages were less or 5 pages were more. What matters is when I start attempting the question, how much time it is going to take for me to attempt that question. That, of course, was quite heavy in some parts of verbal reasoning and most of the part of logical reasoning. Okay, वन थिंग विच आई हैव ऑल्सो मेंशन्ड अर्लियर, और ये हमेशा आपको भी मोर और लेस पता होगा कि एलिट एग्जाम में कुछ ना कुछ सरप्राइजेस हमेशा आते हैं. लास्ट ईयर जब पैटर्न भी चेंज हुआ तब भी स्टूडेंट्स को लगा कि काफी चीजें नई थी. इस साल ऑफ कोर्स सरप्राइज सब स्टूडेंट्स हुए, बट कीप इन माइंड कि इट वाज द सेम फॉर एवरी स्टूडेंट. जिस स्टूडेंट ने उस मोमेंट पे ये समझ लिया कि ये पेपर सबके लिए सेम है, अगर डिफिकल्ट है तो सबके लिए डिफिकल्ट है, इजी है तो सबके लिए इजी है, एंड आई कैन चेंज द फैक्ट कि ये पेपर आया है. ठीक है, सो वो जो EQ होता है ना, हम अपने इमोशंस को उस टाइम पे कितना कंट्रोल कर पा रहे हैं, कैन वी होल्ड आवर नर्व्स और नॉट, वो जिसने कर लिया उसका ये पेपर अच्छा गया. जिन स्टूडेंट्स आधे टाइम तो ये सोचते रह गए कि नया चीज आ गई है, अब मैं इसको कैसे अटेम्प्ट करूं, ये चीज जिसमें जो लोग रह गए ना, वो ना तो क्वेश्चंस को अटेम्प्ट कर पाए, और जो क्वेश्चंस अटेम्प्ट किए भी उसमें भी काफी क्वेश्चंस गलत हुए. ठीक है, तो ऑलवेज बी रेडी फॉर सरप्राइजेस. Okay, you may not get the same questions that you did, you may not get the same kinds of questions that you expected. Okay, it can be little different. So how do you think on your feet in that moment? That is what these exams test. Okay, it's not about how much knowledge you possess, it's about how much you are able to do when you are under pressure. When surprises are thrown at you, do you get rattled, or do you keep calm and attempt those questions in a wise manner? That is what dictates, that is what decides who is going to clear this exam. Please be prepared for this. Every time that I have interacted with especially IMS students, I have told them these things, that there are certain basic skills which these exams want to test. They are not testing your legal knowledge. In fact, in today's exam, if I look at the entire paper, there were no questions from legal reasoning except one passage which you might have seen on aspect of law, but not on legal reasoning. Okay, so people who are able to anticipate surprises better, people who can think on their feet, people who can handle pressure, people who can manage their time, people who can manage their speed. These are the students who crack these exams. It's not about how much I know, as I said. ओके आपको कितना आता है, आपने कितना एक साल मेहनत किया, वो एक अलग चीज है. आप उन 1.5 घंटे में जब आप अंडर प्रेशर हो, सरप्राइजेस जब आप पे आपको दिए जा रहे हैं, तब आप कैसा परफॉर्म कर पा रहे हो, ये चीज मैटर करती है. एंड इस चीज को अगर आप दिमाग में रखेंगे तो आपको क्लैट भी अच्छा जाएगा आपका. ठीक है, या एलेट अच्छा नहीं गया तो कम से कम क्लैट अच्छा जाएगा. ठीक है, तो अपने आप को इन चीजों के लिए आपको रेडी रखना है. दिस इज समथिंग दैट is very, very important. Now, in today's paper, there were 10 passages, as you know, and from each of the passage, the surprise fact was that from each of the passage, 5 questions were there for verbal and 7 for logical reasoning. Now, my understanding of why they would have done this is because a lot of times they have to come up with new passages, uh, takes a lot of time. Paper also becomes lengthy. So, why the paper was 4 pages short? Because for every logical reasoning question or for every verbal reasoning question, they need not create new set of paragraphs or new set of things. It was directly from the passage itself, or you had to derive it, or you had to infer it from the passage. So while trying that, they reduced the number of content that they had given, but in turn what happened was that the questions that they gave, especially in the logical reasoning and critical reasoning section, वो जो क्वेश्चंस थे वो बहुत ज्यादा टाइम कंज्यूमिंग हो गए, बहुत ज्यादा सोचना पड़ा, बहुत ज्यादा मेहनत करना पड़ा उन क्वेश्चंस पे, और इसीलिए आपको लगा कि दिस इज समथिंग न्यू. बट इफ यू वुड हैव लुक्ड एट द क्वेश्चंस केयरफुली, अगर आपने क्वेश्चंस पे सही मेहनत पहले किया है तो वो क्वेश्चंस मोर और लेस आपके सही जाते. तो अभी हमको इससे सीखना है, रादर देन बीइंग वरीड अबाउट कि अब मेरा क्या होगा. लर्न फ्रॉम इट and use it to do better in the CLAT exam. That is the positive spirit that we have to keep when we attempt such papers. Okay? Today, if you feel bad about something, it's completely fine. It's as humanly as you can think. Okay? But from tomorrow onwards, you have a goal, you have a target in mind. Give your best shot to achieve that goal, achieve that target. There should be nothing else on your mind except that I have CLAT exam in a week. What can I do so that I can do well in that exam? That is all you have to think about. Okay, so keep that in mind. If I give you a general overview, GK was one section which everybody told me was more or less easy to moderate. uh, LR was moderate to difficult, and I also looked at all the questions, so I can tell you that it was difficult in many ways. Many of the questions in critical reasoning were easy to moderate also. So they tried to maintain a balance. As I said, not necessarily every questions are tough. Okay, it's how we approach the questions that is what ultimately decides whether a question was easy or difficult. Okay, but overall LR was moderate to difficult. Verbal, many questions were easy also. I felt that when you start with the initial passages on phishing and other passages, you would find easy questions also. But overall, if I look at verbal ability, easy to moderate, more tilted towards moderate questions in the verbal reasoning section. Now let's analyze each of the sections and see, when you look at the very like first few pages, the second page in fact of the AILET paper, you would have seen this, right? And it would have given you an idea ki see how they have set the paper. 1 to 5 is verbal, 6 to 12 is logical reasoning. So automatically you knew more or less in the very beginning itself ki what is expected out of you. Okay, but eventually as the paper progressed, more and more students thought that the paper was quite difficult. Okay, let's look at the English language, the verbal ability section. Total questions, as you know, were 50. uh, Looking at the analysis that I did, and after speaking to a lot of students, I would say that a good attempt would be something like 37 to 40 questions. Okay, if you are able to attempt this much in the English section, it's a very good attempt. If you have attempted less questions, if you have attempted something like 30 to 35 questions, that's also fine, as long as you have good accuracy. Because if you have very low accuracy or moderate accuracy and still if you've attempted less questions, then of course it's a troublesome situation. ठीक है, तो अगर आपने 37 to 40 क्वेश्चंस के आसपास अटेम्प्ट किया है और आपका अच्छा एक्यूरेसी है, तो यू कैन स्कोर समथिंग लाइक 30 to 35, which is a very good score in English in this paper. 35 तक अटेम्प्ट किए हैं, 35 तक अटेम्प्ट किए और एक्यूरेसी बहुत ही बढ़िया है आपका, और 30 प्लस आप ला पा रहे हो, वेरी गुड. ओके, and as I said, we'll be discussing this paper with all of you, so you will get a lot of ideas from there. If you look at the verbal ka section in detail, questions were from, so some questions were there from analogy, source, figure of speech, titles, or even grammar. But the majority of questions were from vocabulary in a certain context or even inference based. So my analysis And the analysis of our experts is that there were around 20 vocabulary or vocab in context questions, out of which, if you have read the paragraph well, if you understand, if you've practiced vocabulary meanings and other things, 17 were quite doable. Around 15 questions were from inference, uh, 10 were quite doable. This was the biggest chunk. So inference and vocabulary, these were the biggest chunk of questions. Of course, there were random titles, style of writing questions, figure of speech, analogy questions. There was, in fact, one passage, if you would remember, on the magnetic compass, which had all the vocabulary questions, right? So such things were also there, and that is why I'm saying, if you had worked on vocabulary and inference, this is something that you would have found pretty easy. Out of the 10 passages, after reading all of those passages, I figured out that five RC passages were quite easy to read, especially in the beginning. Uh, uh, One passage, especially on Formula One, was easy to moderate. Others were moderate to difficult passages. Okay, one of them you would remember was also from the legal aspect of it, right? So that was also there. But overall, as I said, this section was easy to moderate. uh, when you analyze your paper, if you are scoring in this range, you have done very good. Okay. And other thing, as I mentioned earlier, learn from it. Figure out what did I miss, what did I not work on. Okay, because this section is not going to be very different for CLAT also. So figure that out, work on it properly, and you will do really well in the future exams. Okay. uh, Current affairs. Now, this is one section which majorly every student told me, ki, sir, this was quite easy, not very difficult. Some questions, of course, are tricky questions. Okay, some questions are always there, which you might know or which you might have read at one point of time, but there's no way you could have remembered it. Okay, in GK section, 30 questions, as you know, from 121 to 150. Good attempts would be 22 to 26 questions. A good score would be 20 above for sure. Because this was one section where you could have scored more if you would have read carefully from the very beginning. Okay. A lot of questions, as you know, were also from static GK. So around 20 questions were current affairs based, 10 questions were static GK purely, or some static GK related to current affairs. So that was also there. You remember geography based questions. You had questions on days and dates, right? To Human Rights Day was there, Voters Day was there, that was there. Ocean, they had asked the line which segregates or at the point at which they meet. So such questions were there. Majority of the questions which I found to be easy and which many students told me were easy were majorly sports, persons in news, economy, awards. The majority of questions which you also figured out were from sports category. Okay, one category which students generally somehow end up skipping. But this is a good lesson for all of you, that when you attempt CLAT also, focus on everything, give everything its due importance, so that when surprises are thrown at you, you do not get rattled, you face them, right? Environment, appointments. So there was a question on appointment also, right? In fact, that was from November itself. So you can imagine that they are capable of giving uh, last minute questions also. So who was the chief election commissioner? One question I believe was on chief election commissioner. What did you answer in that? And again, it was challenged. There is a matter going on which is pending in the Supreme Court right now on its appointment, right? So such very latest questions from November month were also there, right? So if you would have read these things carefully, you might have been able to answer those questions, right? Other more or less were 10 standard NCRT based questions, science, geography, basic India, politics, and constitution based questions. Those were there as part of the GK section. If you look at the logical reasoning section, I believe this is the one which was the tougher section. I would say some questions were easy, but majorly, as I said earlier, it was moderate to difficult. rather than easy to moderate. It was moderate to difficult. Many of the questions were uh, questions which you could easily have attempted, uh, keeping in mind that it could have taken a lot of time, but the questions were uh, attemptable, right? A good score in the entire section out of 70 would be somewhere around 38 to 44. Depends on your accuracy level also. But if you are able to score 35 plus, 38 plus, around that number, you will be in a good position, because ultimately the overall cutoff also, which I'll talk about later on, uh, that is expected in that same range. So 38 plus 40, close to 40, if you're able to score in the logical reasoning section, you are in a wonderful position to be in very good ranks in the logical reasoning section. Now, one thing which a lot of students did not expect was the classical reasoning. Okay, that is an area from where you got a lot of questions, right? There were coding decoding questions, blood relations, direction based questions were also there. And more or less, if you had good practice in all of these, you could have solved easily 12 to 15 questions in 7 to 8 minutes time. uh, Sometimes 2 3 times I also figured out that if you would have read the question carefully, it was pretty easy to score in the logical reasoning, the classical reasoning, analytical reasoning section. Okay, the data arrangement questions, blood relations, directions, as I said, those questions were there. Some you may think कि सर ये कहाँ आ गया, है ना? But if you read questions, or if you understand ki how I could have derived the answer, then you will understand कि data arrangement, blood relations, directions, इन सब से काफी questions आए थे, right? Major focus, as always, in CLAT as well as in AILET is on critical reasoning section. From my analysis, I figured out that 13 CR questions, and many of our experts were working on it, and they also have mentioned the same thing. 13 CR type questions were easy, 17 were moderate type questions, and remaining were difficult questions. Okay, CR type questions were more or less inference based. There were some questions here and there where you had to assume something. There were no questions on strengthening and weak arguments and strong arguments, which was predominantly there last year. Okay, so a lot of sections in CR which were predominantly there last year uh, were left out in today's section, because some questions from classic reasoning or the analytical reasoning section were also given. So, overall, a good attempt in verbal CR would be somewhere around 35, and a good score would be around 30 here. And remaining 10 marks, 12 marks you can get from the analytical reasoning section. Accuracy matters a lot. So, that is somewhere where you will also have to focus on. But uh, uh, overall, if you look at it, close to 40, if you're able to score in the reasoning section, you would have done well. Okay, overall, if I look at it, overall difficulty level of the paper was moderate to difficult. Good attempt would be 105 to 115. Many students also told me we have attempted 120 questions, many attempted 110 questions, but in a range of 105 115 would be a good attempt. If you are somewhere in the range of 100 105 or 95 to 105, uh, your accuracy matters a lot. So if you have 90% plus accuracy, uh, then you will be in a good uh, uh, range of doing well in this exam. Other students who would have attempted very less questions, of course, would find it very difficult. If you look at the overall good score, last year, if I show you the cutoff, somewhere around 88 89 marks were required to get into AILET, especially in the first list. uh, this year, looking at the moderate difficulty level and the change in pattern a little bit, I would say that a good score would be 80 plus. So 80 to 85 is where I feel that most students who get into AILET, NLU Delhi will be there. Of course, there will be students who will be scoring more than 90 also, 95 also, 100 plus also, but those are exceptions. But to cross the cutoff, I would expect something like 82 to 90 score would be a very good score to get into NLU Delhi. This was the last year's cutoff for AILET for all the categories. So if you look at the general category also till the first list, 89.5. This had gone up to 86, 87 also last year. This year, I feel it will be 80 plus. Okay. I don't think this year it will go up to 88, 89. 80 plus is where I feel it will be. If you look at PWD category again, this year also, I feel that the score will go relatively down. uh, the seats are very less in all of these categories. So it's very difficult to predict PWD category, or Kashmiri migrants or other categories. But other categories, you will get a fair idea. Okay. So this was the cutoff for last year. This is what I expect this year. 80 plus for general category. EWS category would be 75 plus, so 75 to 78. OBC category 65 to 68, SC and ST somewhere close to 50 is what I expect, and PWD category will be around 55, looking at the very less seats which are there. So if you are scoring somewhere in this ballpark figure, you can expect a good rank. Okay. Now what actually happens, how other students have performed, nobody knows that, but this would be the more or less reasonable score at which you can expect to get a good rank. Okay. Now what next? So we have to prepare for CLAT, AILET, MHCET, and keep in mind that it's fine. Whatever paper was there today, that moment has passed. We can't do anything about the paper now. But what we have in our hand is what comes next, which is CLAT exam in a week. You have other exams which are coming up, so that is what we have to keep in mind. Now what do I do in the next 1 week? Please keep that in mind. So revise GK, try to cover the most important topics which were shared in the GK marathon. So go through those topics, read about them in detail so that you can score well. Learn to anticipate surprises better. Prepare yourself for all kinds of scenarios, all kinds of questions. It's too important. Okay. That you don't get rattled just because some questions were different or some questions were put in a different way. That should not rattle us. That should not give us any form of anxiety in the exam hall, because it's all about holding our nerves and attempting as many questions as we can. Practice as many RCs and critical reasoning questions, because when you talk about CLAT exam, this will be the bulk of questions where you face some issue. Legal aptitude, I feel, will be quite easy to moderate. That is one section which you will be able to do well in. Focus on GK also. Finish all the topics that you did in GK marathon. That will give you a lot of edge when it comes to CLAT, because surprises would lie somewhere in the RC section or the critical reasoning section. I don't expect a lot of surprises in the legal section or the GK section. So when you don't anticipate surprises in some section, we know better about that subject. So prepare yourself well. That is very, very important. Okay. Give 4 to 5 mocks, but for the next 1 week, figure out exactly what you need to work on. Okay. Whatever you have been working on, you might have figured out a strategy for yourself. Okay, this is how I should attempt the paper. This is how I should attempt the subjects. This is how I should manage my time. These are the important areas where I should work, and these are the areas that I should not work on. Just work on those things. Do not run after everything, because there is no way that you will be able to cover everything in this section. So the best strategy always is write down what you need to work on, figure out all the topics that you need to work on from your mock tests, what did not go well for you, and just work on those topics. That should be more than enough. Having a good strategy for yourself is very, very important, how you will attempt the paper, but you should not be too rigid with your strategy. You will have to be flexible, because in the exam hall, whatever the paper is, you will have to attempt accordingly. Okay. Time management is very, very important. So focus on these things which matter. Okay, also in the next 1 week, we all have that FOMO in us. Our friend told us, यार ये नहीं किया, अरे यार वो जीके का कितना बढ़िया मटेरियल मेरे को टेलीग्राम पे मिल गया फ्री में, है ना, ये पढ़ लें क्या अपन, राइट? If you go into all of this, unfortunately you will not be able to cover what you thought you should cover in the first place. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, no FOMO whatsoever. Okay, don't listen to those nerds who keep on telling you, अरे ये नहीं किया, ये कैसे छूट गया, राइट? ये मटेरियल नहीं पढ़ा क्या, ये मटेरियल मेरे को फ्री में मिल गया, ये लो 15 मॉक्स और मिल गए, एक एक दिन में 3 मॉक्स ले रहे हैं. दिस इज नॉट द वे टू अटेम्प्ट दिस पेपर. So figure out a strategy for the next 1 week. If you can do it today, if you want to take rest today, completely fine. Do it tomorrow morning. If you feel I've taken enough rest in the afternoon, today write down what will I work on in the next 1 week, and then put a tick mark in front of it as soon as you finish it. Okay? At the same time, this is one mistake that I feel a lot of students end up committing. Don't burn out. Okay, you do not need to study for 15 hours, 18 hours, more than 12 hours, and not having enough rest or some entertainment for yourself. Okay, you need to balance everything together. It is important to work hard, but at the same time it's very important to have good sleep. It's very important to do something which makes you feel good. Could be half an hour. I watched a particular episode of a particular show that I like. I watched this movie for an hour once in a while. You are allowed to do that. Okay, because a lot of times students work so hard 1 week before the exam that when they go to the exam hall, they have no energy left. Okay, don't do that to yourself. It's a genuine issue which I've figured out in students. Don't do that, please. Okay, stick to limited resources. Don't run after as many resources as you can find. Stick to limited resources. Revise them again and again. Figure out what you need to do and just focus on those things. Okay, students, many of them who would be giving next year's AILET, from the paper itself, we have figured out a few things. First, you ought to be a good reader. Have a good command over the language if you want to do well in the AILET section. Okay, basic knowledge of legal concepts here and there will definitely help you, because a lot of legal news and concepts, they do come in the exam. Critical reasoning is extremely important. Reading newspapers, reading editorials, reading op-ed pages, solving passages, all of this eventually helps. Okay, so whether you're going for future exams or whether you're going for AILET, these are the things that you need to work on if you want to do well in these exams. Okay, so please keep that in mind. I hope that you will keep on working on all of those things. All the best, everyone. Take care of yourself. Don't burn out. Focus on the things which are most important. Figure those things out from the mock test, and irrespective of how the paper went, forget about it. Focus on things which lie ahead. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the live chat section, and I'll be very happy to answer. To all the students who are leaving, all the best. Okay, Surya has asked, sir, is there a chance they will ask analytical reasoning in CLAT? See, prepare yourself a little bit for analytical reasoning. Majority of the question are for critical reasoning, but like for example here, some questions can be asked, but your major focus should be on critical reasoning. Okay, how can we increase the number of attempts? See, if you feel, firstly, you need to manage your time properly. Okay, if you manage your time properly, your attempts will go up automatically. So what you can do, maybe in a couple of mocks, is set a time limit for yourself. Ki I will try to attempt these many questions. After that time limit is over, go to the next part. When the time limit is over for that one, go to the next one. Okay, do it for a couple of mocks, see it works out for you. If it doesn't work out for you, work on the concepts properly. Okay, because the more you practice, the more you become familiar with questions. Why do we practice questions so much? Because it gives us that familiarity with questions, so that when I see this question again in the exam hall, I don't have to think too much on it. I already know that I have done this question before, so I know what steps I have to follow, and it becomes very easy. So it's all about time management. The better your time management, the more questions you will be able to attempt. But it's not only about attempting questions, okay? It's also about your accuracy. I might attempt 130 questions, but my accuracy is 50%. What will I do with that? Okay, so once your accuracy reaches 85-90%, then think of attempting more questions rather than just attempting more questions and not figuring out how to do well in it. Blood relations and other logical concepts for CLAT, you need not go too much into it, but keep some basic things in mind. Okay. Pooja has asked how to increase attempts. I have already answered your question, I think, Pooja. Should the non-AILET candidate solve verbal and logical questions? Of course. Okay. You should solve this question. You should solve the entire paper. In fact, if you look at the positive aspect of it, by giving today's paper, no, more or less, you know what is it like to write that paper, write an actual exam. That will help you when you go for CLAT exam. So look at the positive sides. Don't just look at the negative sides of a paper and just keep on worrying about it. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope the session was of some help to you. We will be doing future sessions where we will discuss questions with all of you. All the best. Take care of yourself. Take care of your health. Sleep properly. Work on the things which are most important. And trust me, you will do really well in this exam in future. All the best, everyone. Take care. Bye.